It's been said, what I do is me, for this I came. What would it be like to have so much confidence in who you are that you know whatever circumstances, in whatever context you find yourself, what you bring to the world is the person that you truly are, the person that God made you to be. It's a powerful feeling to know that I can live above circumstances, above outcomes, and there's a unique place that I bring something that no one else does. I want to be that man. I want to bring him to my world, and my world needs him fully alive. I just moved to Colorado, and I was eager to learn about the land, the animals, and so I volunteered for Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I had the privilege of participating in this antelope capture. So we had constructed a very large fence with a half-a-mile opening. A helicopter was going to herd antelope into this funnel, and all of us volunteers and Parks and Wildlife staff was going to run behind the herd, form a human shield, and then slowly work them in to a capture facility where they could be treated medically, they could be tested, some of them could be transferred. And so I showed up, and it was dark. It's early in the morning. I was nervous, I was excited. As the sun began to peek out on the horizon, I noticed most everyone there had an F-250 or more. I noticed most of the guys were pretty hairy. There were amazing beards and Fu Manchus. It looked rather like a Carhartt convention. And here I was wearing a bright red ski jacket. I mean, it's the only jacket I owned at the time. I was scared. The guy that was in charge stepped up on the tailgate of this F-150, and he was going to explain how this was going to work. But all I could think was he's going to say, hey, you, yeah, with the bright red jacket that scares all the antelope away. You must be new here, ain't ya? I was terrified. I felt exposed. I was around a group of men that I thought were real men. And the boy in me reacted. How often we all find ourselves in a situation where we fear exposure or we fear failure. You see, Adam's story is every one of our stories. It says in Genesis, I was afraid because I was naked, and so I hid. See, most of the time when you meet a man, you meet a caricature of masculinity. You meet a fig leaf, mature, sophisticated, and a way of constructing a facade that protects us in a way. It gains some applause. It helps us avoid feeling exposed and disengaging from honest soul-to-soul relationship. We all fear being found out. You see, there are these core questions we have, this search for validation and identity that have these questions. The question of validation of, do I really have what it takes? The question of identity, who am I really? Our souls long to have those questions answered. Until they're answered from the source in which they were intended, we will live for identity rather than from it. It's why G.K. Chesterton said, we are all under the same mental calamity. We have all forgotten our names. We have all forgotten what we really are. See, the self-protective man is not the truest man. The ancient path invites us to develop an ever-deepening awareness of the false man that we've constructed. And through that awareness, we begin to practice putting to death the false so that we can move through death into the greater life in which we were made to live. You see, we all have identities that have been put on us, identities we've taken up. And here's the fact, we cannot live beyond our identity. What are the identities that you have come to take on? Who have you become? It's the central question to begin to excavate and uncover the truth of the false man at work. If we could peel the layers back of our masculine soul, we might find identities like I'm not enough, I'm not a real man. I'm a failure. Actions reveal beliefs 100% of the time, and it is so important to begin to become aware of these identities. A common example is, I'm just a sinner saved by grace. It is simply unhelpful to the masculine journey because we do not live beyond our identity. If you're a sinner saved by grace, then you will never truly live victoriously beyond sin. It's not how Paul addresses all of the men that he walked with when he speaks saints at Corinth, saints at Ephesus. He speaks to the true man, yes, struggling with very deep battles, but always addressing the true man. It would do us well to wrestle with this deep question, who have I become, and how have we constructed a fig leaf to self-protect? It's only from that place of deepening awareness and putting to death the false that then we can begin to consider the next question of who am I becoming? You see, this is the primary question that will lead us to recover the treasure of what God meant when He meant us. When we read the text of nature, we see that God has created us deeply and marvelously unique. You think of the billions of snowflakes, and yet every one of them is unique. The billions of fingerprints, every one of them is unique. Hidden in Ephesians, God lets us in on another secret where He says, "For we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ so we can do the good things He planned long ago." You see, there's something that God brings, intends to bring to the world through us, that He can bring through no other person. There's something that we are meant to know and enjoy about God that no other person can know or enjoy. This word masterpiece, it's fascinating in the original text. The word is poema, and often it's translated as handiwork or handicraft, workmanship, but it doesn't get to the heart of it. It's meant to be an artist's greatest work, one of a kind with a supernatural quality. Who am I becoming? And what is my true name? It's fascinating to see how often in the scriptures we hear stories about receiving a name from God. Jeremiah says, "Before I shaped you in the womb, I knew all about you. Before you saw the light of day, I had sacred plans marked out for you." Isaiah says, "The moment I entered the world, God named me." Isaiah says, "You will be called by a new name. The mouth of the Lord will bestow." And that's why Lewis in The Problem of Pain says, "What can be more a man's own than this new name, which even in eternity remains a secret between God and the man? What shall we take this secrecy to mean? Surely that each of the redeemed shall forever know and praise some one aspect of the divine beauty better than any other creation can." In the scriptures, we're let behind the scenes in a way that is absolutely intimate with the heart of God. In Revelations, John talks about receiving a white stone. John says, "But the one whose heart is open, let him listen carefully to what the Spirit is presently saying to all the churches. To everyone who is victorious, I will let him feast on the hidden manna and give him a shining white stone. Written upon the white stone is inscribed his new name, known only to the one who receives it." Friends, this is a fascinating concept of the white stone. When we pull back the religious veil and see it in its true context communicated from the heart of God, there are these ancient truths that, if recovered, can help us restore identity and become thriving men. This word white comes from the Greek leukos. It's not white as in a color, it's white as in a shining like the sun. It's used in the transfiguration. It means a light, a glow, a luminosity, not of this world. The word stone is sephos. It means eternal and permanent, something that cannot be taken away. The white stone is a symbol, a soul's picture in a word. It's luminosity. in indestructibility. And that's why George MacDonald says the giving of the white stone with the new name is the communication of what God thinks about the man to the man. The true name is one which expresses the character, the nature, the meaning of the person who bears it. It's the man's own symbol, his soul's picture in a word, the sign which belongs to him and to no one else. Who can give a man his own name? God alone. This is our name. This is our soul's picture. It was meant to come to us, to strengthen us and reorient us to God. And it comes through both encounter and process. You see, we were meant to seek after the heart of God, to ask Him our name, to learn our name, and to cultivate an intimacy by being named by Him. But from receiving a name, it was intended to engage us in a process of becoming that name. I have a journal in my office at home, and it's filled with the many names that God has spoken over the years, my soul's picture in a word, a language between God and I, and Him restoring what He meant when He meant me. One of the very first times God spoke a name to me was many years ago. This was before I had theology to understand receiving a name, or theology to even understand asking for God to speak and cultivating intimacy with God. I saw a brochure of John Witherspoon. It was a fellowship offered in his name. I didn't know at the time, but he was one of the founding fathers of America. He was a pastor and a leader of a revolution. And it said in that brochure that John Witherspoon was a man who shaped the men who shaped America. And as I read that, my heart nearly leapt out of my chest. Something burned within me. And I could hear almost an audible voice of God saying, "Son, you are a man who shapes the men who shape my kingdom." He planted the seed deep within me, almost as a sacred deposit, but it began from encounter to process. It was the fuel for the becoming over the next 2 decades, to hold on to my name by way of revelation as a fuel to go through the process of becoming the kind of man that can walk in that mantle. Just yesterday, I was walking around here at the Globe and Anchor Ranch and praying, preparing for this time, and I came upon this tree that it was actually the tree that we had cut down over a decade ago when we had our first retreat where we were contemplating the ideas of becoming a king. God led me there in such a unique and intimate way. He spoke words to me of my name there. It was intimacy. It was soul strengthening. You see, He has a name for you. He has a soul's picture. What is your name? Your name was meant to be the fuel for you to engage in the slow and steady process of becoming the kind of man that can carry the mantle that God has uniquely intended for you. That's why Dallas Willard in The Divine Conspiracy says, "We were built to count as water is made to run downhill. We are placed in a specific context to count in ways no one else does. That is our destiny." Through engaging in a process of becoming our name, over time, we shift in our masculine soul from reaching for validation and identity to becoming a man of strength that offers in love, in sacrifice, and in trueness. Jesus promised that through the death of the false man would emerge a greater life, an indestructible life, a life of greater union with God. And it begins by pausing and giving consideration to who we truly are. Who have I become, and who am I becoming? You might recall Paul, one of the great fathers of our faith, was given a new name in his encounter with God on the road to Damascus. What I find fascinating is for 14 years after he receives his name, we find almost no mention of his life in all of the scriptures. You see, in that time, There was a process of training. There was a process of becoming that name. And the man that emerges, as we see in the letter from Romans, is a man who is very well versed in understanding and identifying the civil war in his own soul between the false and the true. Paul models what we might become as we practice putting to death the false through the power of God working within us, to become the man who lives from identity rather than for identity. Who have I become and who am I becoming? What is my true name? Let him call me what he will. That name shall be as precious as my life. I will seek no more.